Happy Easter!
Happy Easter!
Jesus is risen!
He is risen indeed!
Very good. Right. So there was an event that we need to rehash here that happened 2 Easters ago after both services that I can't shake. I can't shake it. You may have been there. Do you remember when after the service we went out into the garden, parents, grandparents, children, and friends, and we released butterflies into the air? Butterflies that lifted off their tomb-like paper boxes in which they were kept. Those who were once caterpillars were now beautiful butterflies, symbols of Jesus' resurrection. And here's what I can't shake. Can't shake it. It was a question that I read in a book of Easter reflections by famous Christian theologians and thinkers. And one of them had to do with those very same caterpillars and butterflies. One of the authors said this: does anyone tell caterpillars of their impending resurrection? And if they are told, do the caterpillars believe? Are caterpillars told how in dying they will be transformed from poor earth crawlers into creatures of the air with exquisitely painted wings? Can caterpillars conceive that one day they will shed their constricted inch-by-inch belly-to-the-earth existence and become butterflies, flitting light and free upon their wings? The writer continued, I imagine the wise old caterpillars shaking their heads. No, it can't be true. It's fantasy. It's self-deception. It's just a silly dream. The story of Easter, as we hear it retold this morning in the Gospel of John, is full of wise old caterpillars. While we aren't sure if anyone actually tells caterpillars that they'll be resurrected, the disciples cannot feign as much ignorance. We know that Jesus told his disciples of his impending resurrection many times throughout his earthly ministry. He told them that the Son of Man must suffer, die, and in 3 days be raised again. They're told. Do they believe? Could the disciples conceive that one day their leader, their teacher, their friend, would die constricted on the cross, nail by nail, tomb in the earth, only to be raised with angelic companions, free to go and meet his friends? Can we? Can we believe in this type of change? Well, let's start at the beginning of our story with Mary and that stone. When, as we are told, on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene saw that the stone was rolled away and ran to tell the disciples. Did she believe? A stone rolled away. A heavy, large stone. How could it move? She assumed the worst. Someone, perhaps a group of people, must have come and taken Jesus' body away. What else could have happened? A stone like that one should have been permanent. Stones, right? Heavy stones, put in place for a reason. To seal an entrance, to hold something up like a building. They have a finality to them, an unchangeable nature to them. When the stone was rolled in place, that should have been the end. The end of questions about resurrection, about anything changing for good or ill. But this week, of all weeks, we should know that just isn't true. We have witnessed firsthand as we saw flames engulf, destroy, and change old, ancient stones. Stones that shouldn't ever conceivably move. The ancient stones of Notre Dame Cathedral. And when I saw those images this week, I thought to myself, like a wise old caterpillar, no, it can't be true. It's fantasy. It's self-deception. It's just a silly dream. How could these stones move? How can I believe that something like a spiritual symbol for a country, carved from stone and prayer, how could that ever change? But they did. And what about Jesus' body? Could it change? Could it rise? We're told that Peter and the beloved disciple ran to the tomb. And when they arrived, Jesus' body was gone. They weren't just told this was true, they saw it firsthand. Was their first thought that Jesus had risen from the dead? Peter and the beloved disciple shook their heads like wise old caterpillars. No, it can't be true. Why, they saw him die on the cross, pierced and broken. And so we're told they returned to their homes. Mary, however, remained. Perhaps out of grief, perhaps she had not quite given up hope. She was the one who first saw that stones could move. Perhaps a small part of her believed if stones could move, why not this? But even when Mary stood face to face with Jesus, she assumed that the person before her had to be a gardener, a man who makes flowers grow from the earth. In that brief moment, that's the only change she could believe in. Flowers can change and grow, we have seen that, but how can a body that suffered as much as Jesus's, pierced on its hands and feet, has a finality, an unchangeable nature to it? Just like stones, right? Let me tell you a story. This is a story about a surgeon, a hand surgeon, Dr. Paul Brand. Dr. Brand was serving in Vellore, India, working among leprosy patients. And one day he was invited to say a few words to this community in whom he served, outcasts from society. They all gathered together to hear from this caring man. And as he spoke, his eyes were drawn to their hands. Some with no fingers, many drawn in on themselves in something called a leprosy claw. Many patients sat on their hands, hiding them in embarrassment. And noticing this, Dr. Brand started talking. He says, I'm a hand surgeon, and so when I meet people, I can't help but look at their hands. And I can tell a lot by their hands. I can tell often even what their profession was. And then seemingly out of nowhere, changing in an instant, he says, I would love to see the hands of Jesus. The rough hands of when he was a carpenter. The compassionate and sensitive hands of the healer. And even his crucified hands as they were nailed to the cross, crippling them, drawn in on themselves in that moment. And as he said this, a ripple of recognition spread through the crowd. Jesus, with hurt, clawed hands just like theirs. Dr. Brand continued. He said, more than anything, I would love to see his resurrected hands, which we know portrayed all the same marks he had while he was living. And why? So that we can see ourselves in him. All the brokenness, all the hurt, all the imperfection of our humanity. Not gone, but changed, resurrected. And as he finished, Dr. Brand was once again conscious of hands. This time they weren't hidden. All over the courtyard, hands were lifted up in the Indian gesture of respect. The hands, the same hands, they were still stumps, some missing fingers and crooked arches. But these hands were held up high with new pride and dignity, with the acknowledgement that God's own response to their suffering could change the way they saw their broken bodies. No longer outcasts, but members of Christ's resurrected body. On this Easter day, on this day of Jesus' resurrection, we celebrate God's purpose and power to restore and change the broken things, the seemingly permanent, unchangeable things of this world, like stones, like bodies, and even death. Restore them to their full stature, dignity, and integrity. In the coming weeks, despite what the old caterpillars say, we'll find ourselves walking outside, past trees and flowers, and out of the corner of our eye, we will see a flash of color, flitting light and free upon a wing. A message to even the most steadfast old caterpillars within each of us. And in the coming months, we will see stones move, as it appears that new stones will join the ones that remain of Notre Dame to rebuild that cathedral. As prayer and praise re-enters those ancient stones and joins the new ones, it will be impossible to preach anything there but the power of resurrection, change, and new life. And finally, may we acknowledge the power of Jesus' resurrection to change how we see the brokenness, the hurt, the imperfection of our humanity in our world. Not gone, but also not casted out and ignored, not shamed and hidden, as if we don't all need resurrection change in our lives. For in Jesus' resurrection, we can raise our hands, we can raise our hearts, we can raise our voices and proclaim, Jesus is risen. He is risen indeed. And that truth, that has the power to change everything. Amen. Happy Easter!